Hi guys, Chris Parkin here, and we're going to get stuck into our dinosaur this week. Now, a couple of things to note. Once you've done this, you should have available the week 12 assignment, so you can get stuck straight into it, or at least start thinking about what you're going to be doing. So we're just going to do a really basic run through of this, and we'll follow the PDF and see where we get up to. So first things first is clean up the background. I'm not going to do this because that's kind of cheating for you guys. Hopefully by now you know what you're looking out for when you're doing your basic work for the background, and yeah, get stuck into that. Alright, next things on the agenda is we're going to need our dinosaur. So just drag and drop it in as you normally would, and you're going to need to mask him out and position him. Now again, it's stuff that you're hopefully very familiar with doing now in terms of the masking, so I'm not going to show you that bit either. It's all stuff that hopefully is starting to become second nature to you. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to need to grab our shadow. Now I'll turn our shadow layer on, and at the moment I'll just move it to the top so I can actually see what I'm doing. You're going to have to select and make a selection on the shadow. Now there's lots of different ways of doing it. The quick selection tool works reasonably well. It will give you the majority of the selection. Just be careful that you actually make sure you actually select all of the shadow and don't miss pieces out. Otherwise you end up having to go back and put them in later, or if you don't put them back in later, then it ends up looking weird and you chop the dinosaur's tail off or something random. And yeah, you can see it's not quite going to plan across a couple of pieces. So if it doesn't select quite the way that you need it to, remember just to hit the Alt key and you can subtract some of that. And also we can go back and refine that mask. Now I've gone up the back of the across the dinosaur's feet as well, because we're going to need the shadow coming across here. The easiest way to do that is then to take that selection and subtract it, so that we don't end up with too much shadow. And there we go. But we've got enough to work with for starters. Okay, just chop off that corner, and now we can go and refine that shadow edge just to make sure we get the tip of the tail. In fact, thinking about it, we can probably do that with this. Yeah, that's not bad. Let's try that again. So as usual, it's that case of refining your mask so that you've got the pieces that you need, and that will be pretty good. So let's go layer mask, and we're going to reveal the selection. Now obviously we're not going to use that piece of the mask as it looks at the moment, because it's got white halos around it and all sorts. It's only the shape that we're after. But what I will do is just refine a couple of edge pieces here, just so that we end up with that top looking good, and the finger, and sometimes this refine edge function works quite nicely. Okay, so that gives us our excuse me, that gives us our shadow. The next thing we're going to do is use a layer mask. Create a curves layer, and the nice thing about curves is you can control which parts of the shadow, which parts of the curve that you darken. Now with shadows you tend to lose the highlights pretty rapidly, and if you look at the shadows in this image, they've got a little bit of a blue hue to them. So one of the things that we can do is we can change the hue within this adjustment layer, so we can lift it up and just make it a little bit blue, just so it doesn't end up bright. You can actually drop the reds and the greens, and I haven't dropped the reds quite enough, and it's gone a little touch purple. Okay, so we'll come back and adjust that in a bit. But what we can then do is take that adjustment layer and drag it onto the curves layer. Okay, so that's now got us showing our shadow back. We can get rid of that. We don't need it. We're not actually going to have that shadow layer visible in the end. Select our curves layer, Control T, and that will allow us to move this layer around. Now obviously we're going to have to enlarge it and get it to fit into the rest of the image, and we're going to have to turn it a little bit so that the feet go in the right place as well. But we still want to get it so that the line of that shadow of the leg is heading in the same direction as the shadow from the pillar. And that's starting to get there. Now you'll notice at the moment that the shadow is going over the top of the dinosaur, which is not good. That's not how shadows work in reality. They are cast by the object. So simply just drag this down and put it below the curves layer. Now at the moment that's not quite working because we've got a very purpley shadow, and so we need to go back into those adjustment layers and keep playing until we get the shadow set to something that's as close to this color as you can. Alright, so now we've got it adjusted to very close to the right color. The next thing we've got is to pay attention to is the fact that we've got shadows of those power lines currently underneath the dinosaur. Now if you look at how things happen in real life, if you've got a shadow and it's falling over another shadow, or onto an object that's casting another shadow, and you've only got one light source like the sun, those shadows don't get darker. So we wouldn't expect this line here to be there. Now we've got to clone those out. So what you can do is create a new layer underneath our curves layer, and we're simply going to grab our clone tool, obviously adjust the size, current layer and below, and that means that we're not going to copy the shadow over, and simply go through and clone out the layers, and that's it, should be gone. Now if you find you may find it's actually easier to go too far, so we end up losing a little bit of the power line after the shadow, after the dinosaur, after the shadow. And then what you can do is we can grab this curves layer that we've already got, hold down hold down Alt and drag it down, and that will give us another layer of a copy of that layer mask. Sorry, helps if you don't cough while you're trying to talk. So it'll give us a copy of that layer mask, and none of that cloning that we've done will show up outside of the shadow. Now one thing to be careful of with that is if you continue to do any cloning, make sure that you've selected this layer with the actual image. If you end up selecting the layer with the mask, if you end up selecting the mask, then you'll find that nothing happens, and they can get quite frustrating. But yeah, it's one of the tricks to watch out for. So a couple of other things to do, and I've already done this on my shadow, is you'll notice how as you go up a power pole shadow it gets softer, and so you can emulate the same thing. You can grab the blur tool and make sure you've got the shadow layer selected and simply blur the top of the shadow a little bit more. And that's just going to give you a nice diffuse edge. It's going to be fairly hard where the edge of the dinosaur footprint is, because of course if you look at the rest of this image, the shadow is really hard when you're right next to the lamppost. Right, next thing on our list is to go and have a look at some crack brushes, just to kind of make it so that the concrete looks like it's been disrupted by the dinosaur, and try to add to that. So first things first, we're going to need to go to our brush and then to go and download that new brush. So hopefully you've already downloaded it, stuck it into your computer. We're just going to go to load brush, and then the crack brushes are the ones I'm going to use, and that's going to give us all of these. Now it's a case of working through and looking at the picture that all these are going to give, and finding something that's kind of suitable that will look like it, a little bit like a crack radiating out from a footprint. And this one should work. Now, first things first, make sure we've got a black paint, or we can go with a dark blue to try and mimic the colour of the shadows, and make sure I've got the brush selected, not the that's always helpful. There we go. There we go. Okay, now the problem at the moment is the perspective is wrong on that crack. Not only is it kind of too big, but it's also looking like it's flat against the screen. So Control T, and then we're going to go to perspective, and we can make it stretch, and also you can go to rotate, and so we can spin it around. And I'm going to have to perspective warp it again just to make it kind of lie flat. And this is quite good fun. It takes a little bit of fiddling to get it into a situation where it's looking like it's going to be on the ground, and it's a little bit of trial and error, and you find yourself flicking between one version and the other. The nice thing about doing this with a larger image and shrinking it down is your resolution is going to end up being higher. If you take a small footprint and have to blow it up, then you can end up with pixelation of that brush, and it doesn't look fantastic. So that's that one. Let's grab a slightly different crack for this, and because we're going to have to do that manipulation again, put it on another layer. Control T and repeat the process until you've got it into the place that you need. And if I was trying to plan this from scratch, I'd actually try and get photos of these cracks that are already existing and put them in and Photoshop them in properly, because you get so much more texture out of it than trying to use a brush. But hey, it means that you guys now know how to use brushes as well, which is never a bad thing. I think I might tweak the first crack a little bit. And the last thing to do is just to try and get some of that texture coming through from the image. I'm going to go to multiply and then just drop the opacity down a fraction, and it just gives a little bit of a fake texture to it. Ideally, I mean, in real life these cracks would end up being bent down, and you'd end up with shadows within them and all sorts of bits and pieces, but that's a tad on the more complicated side than what we need to be doing today. So, okay, next thing. Okay, last thing we're going to do is add a couple of curves layers to the dinosaur, just to brighten down some of this. Now that's referred to in the PDF. We talk about the fact that you're going to end up with different amounts of reflection and shadows, with the objects being different sizes. So we're just going to darken down the feet, and if I press the / key on the keyboard, you can actually see where that's been darkened down, and it's relatively subtle. I would turn it on and off, but it just means that the dinosaur looks like he's anchored. And the last thing is a little bit of darkening on the underside of his tummy, and the back of his legs, and again similar reasons. So then apply your last finishing touches. Make sure that you've not missed anything when you were cleaning up the base image, and you're all good to go. Send it in and get stuck into next week's assignment. You're going to be taking your own images or downloading them, and there's quite a few hints in the material to get you started on that. I would recommend that you get started as soon as possible, but make sure that you get your feedback from your tutor and apply any changes that you need to. You might get some useful feedback from, hopefully we'll get something useful from your previous one. And yeah, remember, make sure you're telling the story, and you've got to have at least 3 images plus your background and your shadows. So yeah, enjoy, get stuck in.